Hey guys, Toby Mathis here, and today we're going to really dive into the idea of what are liabilities and assets. And specifically, we're going to dive into numbers to help liberate ourselves from the stinking thinking that's being perpetuated upon us by the media, a lot of financial institutions. This will allow you to protect yourself from them. So, some of this may get into the weeds a little bit, but I'm sure you'll come out just fine. Principle to live off of. So I'm just going to share a screen here with you guys, and we are going to be using basically you'll see me there, but for the most part, you're going to be looking at a screen with writing on it or numbers. Principle to think about is money will never turn into wisdom. Wisdom may turn into money. And so it's never a bad thing to arm yourself with a little bit of knowledge so you can keep yourself from being taken advantage of. And hopefully, with a little bit of knowledge, you're able to put some things in place where you can get huge beneficial results for yourself. And at the very end of this, I'm going to show you the numbers on what even doing simple things consistently will equal when it comes to retirement. So let's dive right on in. First thing we're going to look at is what popular wisdom talks about as how much house can we afford. One of the things that really frustrates me is when you go see a realtor, you go see a mortgage broker, something, they say, let's see how much house you could afford instead of how much house you need. What do you need? What kind of neighborhood? And they're always kind of backing it in, and they're using numbers that can get you in a lot of trouble, as you'll see as we actually run the calculations. It sounds interesting enough, but it really does cause people a ton of pain. And it was this type of stuff that caused the 2008 financial crisis. And so I like just to kind of go over this. So they look at this. We have a traditional model of 35 to 45% of pre-tax income. So if you're making, let's just say you're making $10,000, a month, that means that you could spend up to 3,500 to 4,500 on uh, on your housing, which includes your mortgage payment, your property insurance, your property taxes, any private mortgage insurance, all of those things. You add them all up, and they're going to say, "Hey, here's what you can spend." I think that's insane, and as I'll show you, and just look at it. I would call the 35%. They said I wouldn't call 35%. This is actually a commentator who I just grabbed stuff out of where they're talking about Bank of America and Freddie Mac's and Fannie Mae's set. It's letting you hit 45% of your pre-tax income. Holy schmoly! Like, because you're not actually taking home $10,000. You're going to take home substantially less than that, probably about 80 cents on the dollar, if that. So so you're talking about more than, in many cases, more than 50% of your take-home pay going into a house. Just not a smart move. That's how you get in all sorts of trouble. Other ones that they looked at is the 28% rule. You'll see that thrown out there periodically. And then again, it's 28% of your gross monthly income. So again, if you make $10,000, you're talking about $2,800 that they're saying, oh, that's a comfortable amount. You should be okay. Actually, they use that exact example here. And they say your mortgage payment. So again, your mortgage payment, a lot of times they'll trick you and they'll use your interest payment, and they won't be calculating in the principal in that, and then they also won't be calculating in insurance into that, nor will they be calculating in your property taxes, which on a mortgage like this is probably close to $700 to $1,000 a month, depending on where you live. It can be pretty painful. Then they go and they use the debt to income methodology, and debt to income is another one where they say, hey, we don't want you to exceed a certain amount of your total income. And so they might say all of your debt altogether cannot exceed a certain percentage of your income. And they start with the front end, which is going to be the house itself. And they might say, I think here we have 31 to 36% is the max that they'll want on the front end. And then on the back end, it might be closer to 41 to 50. And again, we are just talking of insanity when you talk about these numbers and how vicious this is on something that is not even an asset. And you're going to say, well, Toby, a house is my biggest asset. That's what I've heard. It is not an asset. An easy way to remember the difference between assets and liabilities is assets feed you, liabilities bleed you. Assets put money on the table, put food on the table that you can actually eat. Assets put money in your pocket that you can actually spend. Liabilities take money out of your pocket. If I paid my liability, I'm not going to be able to eat in many cases, right? Which is why a lot of people are house rich and cash poor, because they buy a liability and they bought it with a liability, and that liability is eating up half their money. They have no wiggle room. You have any sort of hiccup, and all of a sudden you're in deep doo-doo. You change your job, you get laid off, pandemic hits, um, a financial crisis, illness, anything happens, and all of a sudden you are really, really struggling to make it, because there is absolutely no wiggle room. The other reason I know that a house is not an asset is because the SEC tells us that. The Security and Exchange Commission actually has a definition of accredited investors. And I'm just going to put it up on the screen so you get an idea. An accredited investor is basically allowed to invest in certain types of investments that the general public is not. So if I do a private placement, if I'm doing a private offering, this is quite often, if it's called a Reg D, it might be a 506, it may be only accessible to folks that meet the definition of accredited investor. Now I'm giving you the highlights of the portion. There's a few other things where it's family offices and some trusts that are over $5 million and some other things. But for us, normal people, these are the rules that we have to qualify for. We either have to have a securities license and be a professional, and if we're not, if we have like a regular W-2 job, then we have to have earned, if you're single, it's $200,000 a year for 2 years with an expectation that you're going to keep making it. If you're married and you're going to use both incomes, then it needs to be $300,000. Again, last 2 years, verified with tax returns with an expectation of making it, or your net worth has to be over $1 million. And I highlighted the portion that says excluding the value of your primary residence. The SEC does not allow you to include it. In fact, if you're underwater in your home, then they make you actually report the debt in excess of the value of the home. If the house is worth $1 million and you only have a $200,000 loan against it, they just say that's a wash. We're not going to call it anything. It's a zero. So it's not just me who thinks that a house is a liability and shouldn't be counted as an asset. It's the SEC, which is there to make sure that we don't do things to harm ourselves, right? It's there to protect those markets. And here we have a situation where it says, hey, if all your money's in your house, you're not really financially sophisticated. If all your money's in your house, you could be you could be suffering very quickly. They understand it and they know. So we always look at these things first. Now, what's the other major purchase that we oftentimes get talked into where it's a higher percentage? And I'm going to say that that's a vehicle. So there's all these things that talk about how much car can I afford, and they use this 20% of your pre-tax monthly income. Other experts say that it should be no more than 15 to 20% of your annual income. Sometimes they're talking about the price of the vehicle. Sometimes they're talking about your payment, and it's important to note that. I've seen as high as the 10 to 15. Let me see if that's actually in here. No, this is just the 20%. They have another one where we'll see 10 to 15. This one is 15% of your monthly net. So this isn't gross income. So if I was making $10,000 a month and I'm taking home $8,000 a month, then it would be 15% of this number. So that would be how you'd equate it. So it gets a little different. It's not on, it wouldn't be $1,500 a month. It would be the lesser of the two. So we'd be looking at the 8,000. And then I think 8,000 is being generous. I'm just plucking numbers out of the air of what your take home would be. On $10,000, your take home is not going to be 8,000. It's probably going to be 7,500 to 7,000. Here's the one I was thinking of. That's that they say, hey, buy a car that's between 10% and 50% of your annual income. I mean, just think about that. If I'm making $50,000 a year, they say go buy a $25,000 car. And I would say, you actually just find out what kind of car you need and maybe buy that and try not to have debt. Save up for a car if you have to. If you feel like you have it absolutely necessary, then try to buy the least amount of car possible that'll serve your purpose. And they also say this craziness of spend no more than 35% of your pre-tax annual income on a car. Pre-tax, guys. That means if you're making $100,000, don't spend more than $35,000 on a car. They're just, these things have no tie to reality. It should be an expense, pure and simple, and you should be keeping it something that you can't get hurt on, and that you can afford. If I have to turn that vehicle in, if I have to sell it at a moment's notice, that it's not gonna crash me, then I'm not gonna end up owing a whole bunch more. There's another one that says it shouldn't be more than 15% of your take home pay. Again, and that's if it's a new vehicle. If it's a lease or a used car, they go down to 10%. And I'm probably more on that 10% phrase. Is like, hey, maybe you really need a vehicle, but uh, again, I would do everything I could to buy it cash and not have a debt hanging over my head on a vehicle. I used to liquidate anything and everything, and vehicles we would liquidate. They don't get much at an auction when you're having to push it. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're going to end up owing a shortfall on it. Another rule that they use is this 80-36, or excuse me, this 28-36 rule on your total income, where they start adding everything up. So your housing expenses are on that 28-36 is all expenses. And so you're just looking at it saying, hey, it's again, gross income, and it's how much of my gross income should I be using? So if we're looking at homeowners insurance, property taxes, they call it POA or condo fees, HOA out here in Nevada. If you have any other expenses, you just want to add it all in. Now, I would add in a few others. I would say you got to be really cognizant of the extra utilities. You got to be cognizant of having repairs in commercial real estate or rental real estate. We literally put aside 10% of gross rents as something called CapEx. In other words, we know we have to repair that house and keep it in good order. You should be doing the same thing with your home and figuring that it's going to cost you so much money. And even if you don't know how to calculate it, kind of look up a lease payment, what it would cost to lease it in that area, and use 10% of that amount. So if your house would rent for $1,500 a month, take $150 a month off the table, even if you're not doing an existing repair, because you're going to spend it on something. You're going to be fixing a fence, a roof. You're going to be fixing, plumbing. You're going to be fixing something that's going to come out of your pocket, and it's better to have that slush fund put aside for it. But what they do basically are saying, again, this is financial institutions using these rules. Sometimes it's Freddie, sometimes it's banks, sometimes it's just rule of thumbs. Is they're basically saying, hey, 36% of your total gross income, and we haven't even calculated in the taxes yet on debt, which just freaks me out. So it's debt, car loans, credit cards, even student loans, all those things, total debt service. And I just see these things getting crazy. So if you want to see how you calculate a debt ratio, it's like, again, if I'm using $50,000 a year, which is what they have down here, if I have a mortgage of 1,100, auto loan of 300, credit cards of 200, monthly debt total, here, I'll use a white one so you can actually see it, 1,600, monthly income is $4,200 a month, which gets me right just over 50,000 a year. So I'm at 38. And I just think that that's brutal, because as you see, I'm going to run the numbers pretty much on this scenario. I'm going to tack it up a little bit and get it to I just grabbed all the states and I said, here's the state average income. And then I calculated out what the taxes would be on. And so I used a little bit higher numbers, but you'll see how these numbers equate when you actually look at somebody's finances. These are far, 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 that they use it as a threshold. It should be something that you're not coming close to, in my opinion. I just look at it and say, you're asking for trouble if you're cutting that far line. Because remember, if I have income coming in, that means that 36% of gross. See if I could actually make my pen work. 36% of gross is going down here, which is about 50% of net, just to give you an idea. So basically half my money is going into liabilities, and these liabilities, what this is, it equals someone else's asset. Somebody else's asset. It's not yours. It's the bank's asset. An asset is something that puts money in. And so every month you're paying them interest that's putting money in their bank account. So let's look at how this actually works from a practical standpoint. And I'm just going to move my screen over just slightly so I can write on a little more effectively. But I just used Idaho as an example. And the median income, which is the average, is $60,999 per year. The tax burden on that, on average, ends up being with federal income taxes, old age, disability, survivors health, hospital insurance or Social Security, Medicare, all taxes added in. What you're going to end up with is having a tax burden. This is not withholding, by the way. This is just the tax burden on that actual money of what you would actually be paying. You may have be withheld more, and you get your refund at the end of the year. But you're basically looking at 23.36%. This is why I really struggle against using gross numbers in tax, because I don't know what your situation is and whether that number is going to be high or low. Everybody always thinks of federal income taxes, and we can make those numbers dance around a little bit. But when you're receiving a W-2 paycheck, you have to be cognizant of the employee taxes, the employer side taxes are being withheld too, even though you're not paying it. That does have an effect on you. That's why they're only paying you so much money, because they have an expense that's associated with you, but you're paying a good chunk of that. Plus you have to pay your state income tax if you have one, and a federal income tax. So we always talk about one of it. And just to give you an idea, in the IRS data book for last year, the last year we have reported is tax year 2019, that amount, and it was right at the end of the year last year, they came out and they showed that about 55% of all the taxes collected for feds is individual income taxes. And then I think it was 33% was employment taxes. It's not a small amount. Just to put it in perspective, businesses pay about 7 to 8%. It was like 7.8%. So employment taxes are 4 times as much as businesses even pay, just to give you an idea. So we have to be cognizant of these things. So our take-home pay is substantially less. So if we use Freddie's guideline of 45% of your gross, you're hitting 59% of your take-home pay going out as home debt. If we use Bank of America's 35% gross, they're willing to allow you to go 46% of your take-home pay on the home debt, which, remember, is the home, the principal, the interest, the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance. Half of your money is gone that you're bringing in every month just to pay for a home. When we look at the 28% of gross, it's still 37%. It's a very big chunk. And again, these numbers, when you look at them, what I generally tell people is, instead of sitting there and paying so much attention on your income, the first thing you should do is say, what house do we need? Like, and maybe look and say, these are the essentials. See what you could rent it for, see what you could buy it for. Because quite often in some communities, when the market's revved up, you don't want to buy the house there because it's off the charts. Like here in Nevada right now, it's going nuts. A lot of places of the country, there's no inventory as we sit when I'm recording this. And so it might be like a true seller's market, in which case you might be better off looking and saying, hey, maybe there's some rentals I should be looking at. Maybe I can get what I need for less. And then I can compare that to where if I go to buy it, then I have to make sure and I'm looking at my budget. And I'll give you some simple rules to follow when you do that. So we hit the house. Now let's go to the car. And again, if we use that 10 to 50% of the car on this average individual, and I just picked Idaho out of that, I'll just scrolling through. So they're all around 20, 22, 21% ish. So I'm just looking at the tax burdens. I liked Idaho because it was at 60 grand instead of some, 57,369. I wanted to grab something that was kind of a more of a whole number and a little bit higher to give you guys an idea. Most people watching this probably making a little more money. If you're interested in financial education, you tend to do a little bit better. But let's just say that then your car pay, like the value of the car that you would buy, somewhere between 6,000 and 30,000, right? So they're trying to give you an idea of here's how much car you could afford, as opposed to what car do I need? What's the least amount I could pay for that vehicle? If you did the 20% of your net, you're talking about close to $780 a month. And again, if I just did a car at that and I followed their guideline and I followed a Freddie guideline, I would be literally at 79% of every dollar coming in going out to just debt on those areas. 79%. When I go back and I look at that, just start thinking of that. I'm just going to use 80% so I can make it really simple. But if you have income coming in, and again, let's say that you make $13,000 a month, you're making big money, you have 10,000 coming in, and you follow those guidelines, and 8,000. This is literally how you always have people that are making over 100 grand a year and they get themselves in financial trouble. And you're like, how the hell did they do that? They're making a ton of money. Well, here's how. They have this much take home coming in. They have 8,000 of it just going into liabilities, and they have $2,000 left. And the problem with the more that you're paying on a house, the more that you're paying on a car, the more it costs. If you go buy a Porsche and you spend some serious money on a car, I don't care whether it's used or new, you're going to pay some bucks when it comes oil change time. That's not cheap. It's going to be probably $400 or $500. Swap out a tire, it's $1,000. Everything's more expensive. You buy the Ferrari, it's way expensive. You buy the Ford, the parts are a little bit easier to come by, right? Everything gets more expensive the more you go into that luxury realm. And they're kind of pushing you up there. They got you tricked into thinking, hey, this is good. Then we look at their maximum debt payments. Again, you're looking at half the money, 47%, and they think that's reasonable. You're working half of your time just to pay debt. You're paying about 22, 23% of your money to the federal government. Of the money that you get to keep, you're giving half of it away to a bank or to a lender. And they think that's reasonable. To me, that sounds like servitude. Somebody else is getting more benefit out of my labor than I am, and that's not the way it should be. And we have all these other monthly expenses. Like now there's not much left, not much money left over to do things like, hey, I have household repairs, utilities, I have food expenses. If I have other transportation, if I have other family members that need to use transportation, maybe I have some credit cards, maybe I have other debts. I don't know. Maybe we'll throw that in there and say that was already included. Maybe there's some alimony, child support. We already have the home. It's like when we have the home payment, we'd have the mortgage payment, we'd have the home insurance, and we'd have the property taxes already knocked out. If we have the vehicle, we would have the auto expense, and we'd have the auto insurance. And let me see if there's any gas floating around here. Gas, I'd have that covered. But everything else is still sitting out there. We haven't even talked about health coverage. Hopefully you have it through an employer, but you still have your deductibles and your copays, which again gets people in trouble because they don't realize, hey, that there's high deductible plans now. Quite often they're paying the first $2,500 as a family, maybe even more, and it can get a little it can get a little expensive. Personal maintenance, one of my favorite. If you're getting haircuts and stuff, all of a sudden, childcare, going out, having recreation, doing anything. This cable bill now, that those things are $100 to $300 just for saying, hey, internet, that would be included in that. All of a sudden, there's not much money left. And what's really important is we have to start a savings plan. This is what this stuff would look like if we use a reasonable plan and we budget it ahead of time. And instead of using their ridiculous numbers. We created our own and we said, this is what I can afford based off of my research, as opposed to some government bureaucrat saying, well, this won't kill you. Like, we're going to rack you up. So this rule is the 10, 10, 10, 70 rule. 10, 10, 10, 70 rule. 10% goes to giving. And I know some of you guys don't tithe and some of you guys don't want to give. That's fine. Roll it into something else. It'll roll into this third category if you're not going to do the giving. 10% towards debt payments to pay down your debt. Assuming you have existing debt, then I want you to take 10% of whatever your net income is. And this is net. This is what's home. So this is take home. I don't put much credence in gross numbers. I care about what goes into my bank account every month. 10% goes towards debt. 10% goes into investments. 70% is my budget to pay my expenses. And then I can break that out and actually kind of figure out my own numbers of what I can afford. I'm not, incapable of figuring out what my expenses are. I can just go pull a statement, my bank statements, and take a look and see how much things are, how much I can afford to pay for things. Maybe I need to cut back on certain things. Maybe I'm doing just great. Maybe I actually have more money that I can put into the investment. But if you're not giving, roll that into your debt. And if you don't have debt anymore, roll it all so that you have 30% going into your investment. And let me show you what this looks like. So same situation, we'll grab our average Idaho resident. And let's just again say they're making $60,999 a year, so 61,000. They have their tax burden, which is right now it's 23.36 when you add everything up. So their take-home pay is $46,000 a year, or $3,895 a month. So we would put $389.58 towards giving. And again, if you're not a big giver, if you feel like, hey, I got other fish to fry, put it towards your debt. You'd do the same thing towards your debt. And you'd make sure that you had 10% going to investing. So these are all 10%, 10%, 10%. And then this is the 70% that you budget to live off of. And say, oh, I can't do that. It's just not enough. There's people that manage to do it. Try a little harder, shoot for it. Even if you miss it, you're not going to put yourself into harm's way if you're trying to hit those numbers. But all too often we want to live up here, and our budget's not quite there yet. You could save and get yourself there. But watch what happens when we take just that little $389. We're just basically taking $390 a month, and we plug it in. And I went to investor.gov, which is the Department of the Security and Exchange Commission. So I'm not using some hocus pocus weird website. I'm using our government website that's very specific about different types of investments. And I'm just plugging in the number. And I say, let's say I'm doing it for 40 years. So say you started when you're 25 and you're going to retire at 65. This is what you would look like. You want to know what you would look like if you just did this? If all you did was plug away doing this, you're going to be sitting on over I used 3 different categories. This is 12%, this is 10%, and this is 8%. The S&P 500 over the last 10 years has been at over 13%. Historically, it's somewhere in the neighborhood, depending on how far back you go. It's either here or it can be as low as here, depending on how you look at it. Now they run it. When you're using the infinity system, our people typically are up here. They're far above. They're getting about 1% just off of the options, which is more than 12%. Plus they're making 2 to 3%. So they're usually in the teens. But I'm just using these numbers. If you just hit somewhere in the middle, you're almost $2 million, or you're just a little over 2 million actually. So, I mean, I'm talking about million, you're still over the $1 million. This is still over 1 million. And this guy up here is about 3.6 million. That's if all you did was take roughly $389 a month and paid it into an investment account where you did the techniques in infinity investing. That's all you did. And you don't even have to do them all. You're just doing one, the basic stock market landlord. This isn't even rocket science. Like, and the stock's still appreciated. This is just the returns off of it. You still have the underlying asset. You'd still have a ton that's valuable on the investing side. Now, here's where it gets really interesting is if you manage to double that up, you paid off your debt and you put in $779,000 a month. So you pay off all your debt and then you start doing that. Watch what that looks like. Same scenario. If on the higher end, you're over $7 million in retirement savings. If we're sitting here on our average, we're over 4 million, about 4.2 million. This guy down here is close to 2 million. Even if you came in around 88%, which again, S&P over the last 10 years is over 13%. And we're not saying just do the S&P. What we're saying is even if you looked at the market and you just invested in things like ETFs in the market that were even paying a reasonable dividend rate, you're going to exceed these numbers. This is just raw. Hey, here's the return. This is the value of the account. That's pretty amazing when you just look at the numbers and you realize just a little bit of discipline on my side, and I'm going to end up with some pretty big benefits as an individual. So that's what I wanted to go over today, guys, is break these things down. I know it gets into the weeds a little bit, especially when you're looking at percentages and gross versus net and all these things. The point that I'm making is they're trying to lead us into a position where we become the best consumer for their asset. In other words, if I am a debtor and I borrow money for somebody, the bank or the lender is the one sitting with the asset. And so they're putting us in a position where they can maximize that asset by convincing us to overbuy. Happens all the time. These numbers, when you look at them, are absolutely ridiculous. You're looking at it going, that, like, if that was your child who's venturing out in the world and they saddled themselves with massive amounts of debt, and you started hearing the cries like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm swimming in quicksand. I'm feeling stifled. I feel oppressed. I'm getting depressed. That's what happens when you have that type of debt. I know what it does to people. Statistically speaking, it cuts your life expectancy. If you're on the lower end of the spectrum from a economic standpoint, it can be over 10 years of life expectancy on average. It can be 11, it could be 15, depending on your sex and how much you make. That's how important this stuff is. That stress puts so much pressure on people. And if all you did is removed yourself from being subject to their nutty numbers, and you just said, hey, you know what? I need to make sure that I can do things at X number of dollars. So if I'm making $50,000 a year, I know I need to be able to live off of 70% of whatever I'm bringing home. And that if I do that consistently, I will be able to liberate myself and my family at some point in the future. Because remember, those numbers are great over a 40-year stretch, but after 10 years and 20 years, you have a nice nest egg there that's been building up. And from what I've seen, people, once they become savers, they much prefer to save than to spend. They much prefer to get into investments than to just spend the money. So that being said, I just wanted to give you guys some numbers to think about and a different way to combat some of that disinformation that's flowing around out there that gets us into making unwise unwise financial decisions. And remember what I said in the very beginning is that that wisdom can become money, that money never becomes wisdom. So if you just impart a little bit and put a little discipline in place and are wise in the way that you spend your money, you will generate a lot more.